When a nation gets anti-Semitic, it self-destructs. I don't know of any exception to that rule. And that's exactly what is happening there. The amount of good that would happen if the Islamic Republic is overthrown is almost too good to even imagine.
Dennis Prager, one of the great public intellectuals of our day, was just a few days ago being interviewed, and he was asked his thoughts on what is going on in Iran. And he said something without saying it explicitly that I believe was issuing a very stark warning to the United States of America as well. Have a look at this.
Status, the revolution that is happening now. We have seen so many revolutions in Iran. People have tried to rise up against the regime there, and continuously they have been squashed. Do you think this uprising is going to be any different?
It looks like it will be different. And I wouldn't have said this even a week ago, but I think it is different. We're talking about millions and millions of Iranians all over Iran. And they are on the offensive. This was not the case in any previous widespread demonstrations in Iran. The demonstrations are massive. This corrupt, vile regime of the Islamic Republic of Iran can't give its people water. I mean, most third world countries give their people water, and Iran can't. It can't give the Iranian currency is worthless. It reminds me of the German currency at the end of the Weimar Republic, where people took wheelbarrows of Reichsmarks in order to buy a loaf of bread. This is what is happening there. And the people of Iran know in their hearts, at any rate, that this regime is corrupt. You know what it spent all its money on? It spent all its money on Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and every group that is dedicated to destroying Israel and killing all its Jewish inhabitants. That's what they spent their money on, and now they have no money for water. So, if I may digress for a moment, this is why I have said for years that anti-Semitism, when a nation gets anti-Semitic, it self-destructs. I don't know of any exception to that rule. And that's exactly what is happening there. The amount of good that would happen if the Islamic Republic is overthrown is almost too good to even imagine. It would be one of the great things to happen and deserved after October 7th, 2023.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up anti-Semitism in Iran, because their leader originally ran on an anti-Zionist, anti-Jew, anti-West platform and kind of got everybody behind him. But now apparently research is coming out of the Iranian people that they're one of the least anti-Semitic people in the Middle East, mostly because they were so disgusted by what their leaders have done to them, and they realized that the whole thing was one giant lie just to get them into political power. And the other really interesting thing that is happening with the most recent revolution that we're seeing is that it's not just students. In the past, you saw students who are going to the streets in Iran. Now you're seeing merchants going out to the streets. So in the past, when the regime kind of neglected the uprising and called it, oh, just silly little students, let's just not pay attention to these little girls. Now you're seeing actual merchants, people who can't sell anything, can't buy anything, can't run an economy. They're the bedrock of whatever is left in the Iranian economy. And they themselves are now coming out as no longer just the students, and wondering whether that can be enough of a change for the Iranian people to muster the courage to move forward.
Apparently it is. And I don't know if I would have said this a week ago, because I'm not an optimist about overturning evil regimes from within. But apparently it's so widespread. I mean, they've rendered the currency virtually worthless. They have no water to give their people. And by the way, I saw an amazing video on the internet about how the Iranian regime had mismanaged this giant lake in Iran and cut it off as a supplier of water. It's good for the heart to see the evil get what they deserve. And apparently, I don't know that this is true, but I've seen many reports that Khamenei has gone to, or will go to Russia. And I can only say Russia deserves him, and he deserves Russia.
It's a bizarre thing that some of the Iranians had more animosity towards the West than they had towards the Soviets, given what the Soviets have done to the Iranian people and the Soviets' relationship with the leader that literally destroyed their country.
I don't know. It's a very tough question. What do the Iranian people in general, understanding there are always exceptions, what do they really believe is the enemy of their country? The West or the dictatorships of the North and East? I don't know the answer, but it's clear now. I mean, I wrote, when I was still being published in the Los Angeles Times regularly, I wrote a long piece on the tragedy of abandoning the Shah. That, as bad as he might have been, he was a giant compared to what's coming in now. That was in 1979 or 1980, when people were saying we shouldn't support the Shah. And now the Shah's son they're chanting for him. I got to tell you, I kept hearing Marg bar dictator. Marg bar, even I who know no Farsi, even I know what that is. Marg bar Israel, Marg bar America is death to Israel and death to America. And now Marg bar has been shifted over to the leader of Iran, to the dictator.
If Donald Trump or Marco Rubio were listening to our conversation, what would you say to them now?
You two and others in your administration have done so much good in your first year that historians will be beside themselves that a guy they had total contempt for had achieved so much good.
Anti-Semitism destroys societies. You know, it's interesting. The we've been talking about these protests and how they are motivated by economic concerns, that they were led by the merchants and by the collapse of the Iranian currency and by the lack of water and the lack of basic necessities. And what Dennis does here is he connects the dots and says, yeah, the reason the economy was collapsing is because of, not just because they spent their resources on the terrorism, which is what people say, but because of the anti-Semitism. The hatred for Jews destroys societies, and that is such a powerful statement. And he said there that he does not know of a historical exception to this rule. Look, it's been true so often. Anti-Semitism takes over. Hatred for someone to blame becomes, the ethos of the society, and therefore failure is never blamed on the bad leadership or on the corruption or on oneself or on people not using their human agency. The failure becomes blamed on the Jews, on the Zionists, on this external enemy. And this kills accountability, and it causes a distortion when it comes to coming up with real solutions to a society's problems. So it's not just some spiritual thing that hatred of the Jews leads societies to collapse, but Dennis points us to the fact that, yeah, if you're consumed by hatred of the Jews and you see them as the source of your problems, and therefore you put your resources in that direction or your thinking in that direction, you are going to end up collapsing and failing and not solving your own problems. We've seen this pattern again and again in history, in medieval Europe, in Nazi Germany, in the Soviet Union, and the radical Islamist regimes of today. They have different ideologies, but the same outcome. Their hatred for Jews brings about, in the end, as the dominoes fall, it brings about economic decay. It brings about intellectual stagnation, again, not really solving your problems, and eventually collapse. Because anti-Semitism is this moral inversion, right? Healthy societies say, how do we improve? Anti-Semitic societies say, who do we blame? And it's the Jews. And think of the contrast between that and Israel. Israel has its enemies, but Israel lives under constant threat and yet is constantly innovating in medicine and water technology. They export this water technology to African nations that need water. So here's Iran that's selling billions of dollars in oil to the Chinese Communist Party, and they can't bring water to their people. And meanwhile, the Israelis are producing water for nations that need it. But I think the most important thing that Dennis said was this warning he was giving that anti-Semitism destroys societies. And I think it was a warning to America, because right now on the American right, in the conservative political ecosystem, which Dennis is a major figure in, we're seeing a disturbing rise in anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish voices. And I believe that Dennis was issuing a warning to his own side of the aisle, saying, do not embrace anti-Semitism. It is brain rot and it will destroy society. Now, he also made that comment at the end there when the interviewer asked him what he would say to Trump. And he just praised him and said, historians are going to look back at this administration and they're going to see unbelievable accomplishments, which is true. And it might seem unconnected to what he was talking about, but I think it's very connected, because right now, as we record this, there is this huge dilemma about what the Americans should do. And there are those who are pressuring President Trump not to do anything, and those who are pressuring him to step in and take action against the regime because of their treatment of protesters. And I believe that when we look back on this time period, historians will evaluate the Trump administration and they will praise them for doing all the good things. But how this Iran situation turns out is going to be a huge part of that narrative. And if this regime is not brought down, if action is not taken against the regime, or worse, if the Trump administration makes decisions that end up saving the regime from collapse, this will be a civilizational mistake of historic proportions, and history will judge the Trump administration accordingly. One last thought I had as I was listening to Dennis Prager here, and when he was talking about how anti-Semitic societies end up falling apart, it brought to mind the fact that the Bible says back in Genesis 12, a very famous verse where God says that I will bless those who bless you, talking to Abraham, and I will curse those who curse you, up to, those who bless Israel, bless Abraham's offspring, will be blessed, and those who curse them will be cursed. And I thought to myself, as Dennis was talking, hey, maybe this verse isn't saying some sort of spiritual thing like God's going to come down and grant you blessings, but maybe it's actually talking about cause and effect, that societies that are consumed with cursing Israel, that are consumed with Jew hatred, end up being cursed. It ends up causing their downfall. And the reverse is true as well. So again, very powerful message here from Dennis Prager.